Hello everybody, I am Silverpaw Reads and I'm bringing you Chapter 7 of Spike, and this is actually Part 2 because this story kinda can get long to read and stuff. I apologize if you hear my Sega ringtone in the background. I need my phone on just in case I get an important text and stuff and I have to answer it kinda right away. So whatever, let's get on here again. They had beat up Spike innumerable times, still he'd never shown fear or submissiveness. He guessed that was one of the reasons Marco was always after him. He was the only one at school who they couldn't boss around, because Spike wasn't your average victim, as he would always fight back. Spike respected adults and elders, but people his own age was to him nothing more than worthless trash, just like himself. Therefore, he could treat them the way he was being treated, violently and disrespectfully. Another theory Spike had regarding why Marco was after Spike was that Marco now saw Spike as a rival and someone who could challenge his position, and would therefore do everything in his power to keep him at bay and remind him who was in charge. However, it seemed quite obvious that Marco was afraid of Spike, since he had to keep his gang around at all times. "Hey, Spike," Marco grinned, accompanied by the chuckles of his crew members. "Marco," Spike said curtly. They stared at each other, but Marco laughed loudly when Spike had to withdraw his stare after 5 seconds. He'd won the stare off. "What do you want, Marco?" Spike asked in a slightly threatening manner. Marco just laughed again and quickly fixed his short, spiky hair. "Oh, why, me and my homies would just like to have some fun. Right, guys?" "Sorry, I didn't quite hear you. Did you say you and your homos?" Spike said, just to agitate Marco, and it worked. "Why, you..." Marco growled through his gritted teeth, but managed to control himself. He took a deep breath, then he grinned again. "I saw what you did to that girl. You made her cry, didn't you?" "What's it to you?" Spike replied, scowling at Marco. "Why'd you do it?" Marco asked. "She annoyed me." "Why didn't you hit her?" "I didn't find her worth hitting." The gang started oohing at him, followed by a mocking laughter. "Wow, you're so tough, Spike," Marco said sarcastically. "Well, we don't find you worth hitting either, but it's just so much fun that we'll do it anyways. Guys?" And with that last command, Marco's scrawny thugs started walking towards Spike with raised fists. Spike took a stance and was ready to fight back. 2 of Marco's boys tried grabbing Spike's arms to hold him so the others could use him as a punching bag, but Spike wouldn't let them. He launched an elbow in the first guy's stomach and then punched the second guy in his ear, causing him to get dizzy and lose his balance, so he also fell to the ground. Marco got furious and commanded the rest of the gang to get Spike. They hesitated at first but didn't want to disobey their leader, so they trudged towards Spike, yelling threats at him to intimidate. Spike snorted. He wasn't afraid of them, they were just annoying, especially because there were so many of them, and cowardly as they were, they all attacked at once. The only reason they had managed to beat him up so many times was that he was always overcame by them. One-on-one, they never stood a chance. 3 of the boys ran towards him, and while Spike launched a right punch in the face of the guy in the middle, the 2 on each side of him managed to grab a hold of Spike, but needed help from 2 other guys to keep him down. The remaining boys began kicking and punching Spike. Marco laughed out loud, loving what he saw. He let them beat him some more before finally ordered them to stop. "Leave him to me," Marco grinned and walked slowly over to Spike, who had fallen to his knees, held tight by now 5 boys. The 5th boy was holding his head up by his hair. Marco stood leaning over Spike with a smug grin on his face. Then he kicked him hard in the stomach. Spike coughed, getting his breath knocked out of him. Having a foot launched into one's stomach hurt like hell, but Spike refused to let it show. Marco was annoyed by how stoic Spike was. He wanted to make him cry, wanted him to beg for mercy, wanted him to at least show some form of weakness. Spike just glared at Marco with eyes saying that one day he was going to get back at him and then he'd be sorry. Marco raised his fist, this time aiming for Spike's face. The 5th boy was still holding his head up, so there was nothing Spike could do to prevent Marco from landing a direct hit right on his nose and probably break it. "Time to redecorate your fugly face," Marco laughed evilly. Spike didn't want to close his eyes, didn't want to seem like a coward, but when he saw the fist getting dangerously close to his face, he just had to close them. He waited for the impact, but there was none. Instead, he heard Marco shout, sounding like he was in pain. Then he heard a thump of something or someone falling to the ground. Spike opened his eyes and was met by a confusing sight. Marco lay on the ground with his hand covering his face, bleeding heavily from what had to be his nose. Then confusion turned in surprise as Spike saw a blonde boy standing above Marco with a trembling fist and a shocked face. "Sam?" Sam stared at his aching fist in realization. He'd just hit someone. He'd punched someone so hard they fell to the ground. He then looked up and remembered why he'd done it. He saw Spike still being held by 5 people, which was just damn unfair, and seeing Marco taking advantage of this and wanting to punch Spike in the face had enraged Sam to the point where he'd blacked out and acted solely on his emotions. And those emotions told him to hit Marco. He looked at the people holding Spike again and noticed they were all wide-eyed and moping. Then he glanced down at Spike and expected to see a happy, or at least thankful face, but instead Spike looked angry. "What the hell are you doing?" Spike shouted at Sam. "What?" Sam stuttered. "What do you mean? I'm helping you." "Don't you understand?" Spike hissed. "Now they're going to start bullying you as well." "I don't care," Sam said and fought to hold back his tears. Spike looked at him. He was thankful that Sam had just saved him from excruciating agony, but he was also angry because now Sam was going to be in deep trouble for the rest of his school years. "Didn't you hear what I said this morning?" Sam continued. "I can't stand the thought of you getting hurt." Spike looked away. "Sam, you moron," he nearly whispered. "Oh, so trying to help you makes me a moron? Well, fine, call me what you want, but I just can't sit and watch people hurting you. I have to do something about it." "I fucking told you to stay out of it," Spike shouted at Sam. Sam was about to burst into tears. So many emotions were building up inside of him, like a brewing storm just waiting to erupt. And on top of it all, Spike was angry at him for being saved. It was so unfair. "Fuck you," Sam shouted back at Spike. He suddenly felt like hitting Spike too, but took a couple of deep breaths to control his anger instead. Then they heard a laughter coming from below them. Marco, two of his boys, had come over to him and were now helping him to his feet. His shirt was covered in nosebleed and his face was a mess. Still, he laughed. "Wow," he chuckled and grinned at Sam. "You have a friend, Spike?" Spike didn't say anything. He just gave Marco a mean look. "Well, well," Marco turned to his boys. "What you say we give Spike's little friend a warm welcome?" "Leave him alone, Marco," Spike snarled. He wanted to wrath free from the many arms holding him down, but it was of no use. "It's okay," Sam assured Spike. "I can handle this." Marco cackled. "You think you can take us down alone, Sam?" "I think I can manage," Sam said, self-confident. "Oh, really?" Marco snickered, then turned to his gang and did a nod in Sam's direction. "At 'em, boys." "Stop it!" Spike shouted. "Sam, you can't take them all down by yourself." "Oh, yeah," Sam grinned. "Watch me." Two of Marco's boys ran towards Sam and were about to punch him, but Sam dodged them and punched them both on the sides of the faces. Then he ran past Marco and began fighting the people holding Spike down. One by one, they had let go of Spike, and it didn't take long before Spike was released from their grips. Marco watched in terror as his nemesis and his obviously strong friends stood there without anyone to fight them. He decided now was a good time to flee. "Spike, look," Sam said and pointed at Marco. "He's getting away!" "Like hell he is," Spike growled and dashed after him. Sam followed after and soon witnessed Spike hurl at Marco, slamming him to the ground, and before Sam could reach them, fists were flying and they were fighting like wild animals. Then Marco cowardly kicked Spike in the groin and tried to escape a second time. Sam ran after him, soon grabbing a hold of his shirt and started punching him. Marco fought back the best he could, but Sam was much too strong for him. Moments later, Spike had gotten up from his feet again and joined the fight. The majority of the students around them started cheering while some of the girls were screaming and telling them to stop, but they didn't stop, not until two male teachers had to come and break up their fight, dragging them to the principal's office. He had his back turned away from the three boys, looking out the big window where he could see the entire school ground, and he sighed deeply. The two teachers standing beside the boys stared hard at them. Then they looked respectfully up at the principal, waiting for him to say something. The principal sighed again before he turned around and finally spoke. "I'm very disappointed in you boys," he started. Sam bent his head down in shame, while Spike and Marco, standing on the right and left side of Sam, were glaring viciously at each other. They all looked horrible where they stood, covered in blood, bruises, and dirt. "Now, I want to know, who started this?" the principal asked. Spike didn't say a word. Sam didn't say anything either because Spike didn't. Marco, however, pointed at Spike and said everything was his fault. Sam denied him, but then got blamed by Marco for having started it. Spike got angry at Marco for giving Sam the blame, and so he cursed at him. The teachers got mad at Spike for cursing, but then Spike started cursing at them for interrupting their fight, and the teachers got mad at him again, threatening him with detention. Spike told them he'd already gotten detention, and then went back at cursing at Marco, who was arguing heavily with Sam and almost started to fight again. "Stop it, all of you! God damn!" the principal roared. "I don't care anymore who started it. You are all fighting, and your disgusting behavior will have consequences. You'll be all getting detention for the rest of the week." Sam, who'd always been a good boy and never gotten yelled at for anything, looked completely devastated and saturated with guilt. Spike knew he would get in trouble at home for having to be late every day, and so he started protesting. Marco, for once in his lifetime, agreed with Spike and started protesting as well, but only because he hated school and would rather die than spend some extra hours at school for an entire week, especially if he had to spend it together with Spike and Sam. However, there was no use in arguing any further. The principal had made up his mind, and there was nothing they could do to change his decision. The teachers led them out of his room. Finally, one of the teachers noticed Marco was limping, and also how Sam was holding his hand on his shoulder, looking like he was in deep pain. Spike uttered a low grunt every now and then, and Thought it didn't look like it. The teachers figured he was in pain as well. Alright, that's it, the first teacher said and turned to his colleague. John, we need to take these kids to the doctor. The teacher called John agreed. They led the boys out to the parking lot where they told them to get in one of the cars. Wait, where are we going? Didn't you hear what they said? Marco said and rolled his eyes. They're taking us to the doctor. A doctor? Spike suddenly exclaimed, No way, I'm not going to no doctor, he protested and began walking away from the car. The first teacher stopped him. Look, you boys are hurt, and as teachers, you're our responsibility, so we're taking you to the doctor to make sure you're okay. But I'm fine, see, I don't need a doctor, Spike said. He raised his arms and waved them, trying to convince them he was fine, but the second he did, he felt a jolt through his body and quickly placed his hands on his ribs. That's it, you need someone to look at you, the teacher said. It's okay, Spike, Sam smiled. If you don't want to go alone, I can go with you. Spike sent him a sour look. I don't need to be followed. I'm not a kid. I can go by myself, thank you very much. Well, then it's settled, the teacher said. Please, we'll take you to the doctor. But, Spike tried. Come on now, Spike, get in the car, the teacher said and opened the back door for him. Marco grinned. You're not afraid of doctors, are you? As if, Spike snorted and reluctantly got into the car. Again, Sam had to sit between Spike and Marco to prevent them from fighting, and thanks to him, they were both quiet for 30 minutes. It took them to drive to the health center. Spike was nervous, extremely nervous, as they sat in the waiting room. Sam was already done. They'd found out he had dislocated a shoulder and had helped him get it back into place. Other than that, there was nothing wrong with him except some minor injuries that they had to get cleaned up. Marco was still in there, and when he was done, it would be Spike's turn. Sam could see Spike was nervous and wanted to ask why, but with the teachers around them, he decided it was best not to. He'd just embarrass Spike again. 5 minutes later, Marco came out from the doctor's office on crutches. How'd it go? The teacher, John, asked. Son of a bitch broke my nose, Marco said, cross, and glared at Sam. Then there was just something about my leg muscles or something. They told me to take it easy for a few days. Sam automatically felt like apologizing, but a look from Spike made him keep his mouth shut. Spike Schaefer, a nurse called out as she entered the waiting room. Spike took a deep breath before he stood up from his chair and walked towards the office. The nurse smiled warmly at him and showed him inside. The walls were painted white and it smelled of plastic and something he couldn't quite recognize. This was the first time in his life Spike had been to a doctor. Everything was new to him and everything looked scary. The doctor sat by his desk in front of a computer, typing something on what looked like a scheme of some sort. He didn't look at Spike at first, just politely told him to sit down. Spike noticed a blue chair closer to the desk and very carefully sat down. He folded his arms, didn't feel comfortable enough to lean back in the chair just yet, and instead sat arched back and looked around. On the shelves of the bookcases there were many plastic models of various organs, and on the wall there was a poster of the different states of pregnancy, as well as a poster of a penis. Spike looked away, disgusted. He looked down at the floor instead, and listened to the ticking sound of the doctor's keyboard. The floor was patterned, and when Spike looked long enough at it, he noticed he could see different pictures and figures on it. There was a wolf, a pig on a tricycle, some sort of wizard-like man, and a lion. Looking at the silly images on the patterned floor revealed somehow calmed Spike down a bit. Then the ticking suddenly stopped, and the doctor turned his chair around, smiling at Spike. Spike quickly looked up at him, not knowing what to expect. So, Mr. Schaefer, was it? The doctor smiled. Spike said carefully. The doctor smiled kindly. Spike it is, then. Spike looked away. 4 seconds had passed. So what can I help you with? Spike shrugged. He didn't need any help. I understand you were in a fight, is that right? That's right, sir, Spike carefully replied. The doctor blinked twice, then he chuckled lightly. You don't have to call me sir, Spike, he said with yet another smile. Sorry, Spike apologized. Oh, not at all, the doctor said. Well, let's have a look at you then. Could you take your shirt off? Spike's eyes widened. You want me to undress? He stuttered. Why, of course, I need to examine you to find out what's wrong. Can't I just tell you what's wrong? Spike tried. The doctor smiled wryly, apparently a bit amused by this. Do you know what's wrong? Spike had to think about it. All he knew was that his ribs hurt, plus several other places ached when he moved in certain ways, but he didn't know what was wrong with him. No, he replied after a while. Exactly, the doctor said. Then would you please undress so I can have a look at you? Spike was desperate. Can't you just check me with my clothes on? The doctor looked puzzled at him. Is this uncomfortable for you? He asked. Spike nodded carefully. I see, the doctor said and took off his glasses, wiped them gently with his shirt and put them back on. Well, you only have to take your shirt and jeans off, he assured him. That's the problem, Spike admitted. The doctor sighed. Okay, if it's that much of a problem for you, I can try checking what I can with your clothes on, but if I notice something I have to take a closer look at, you have to cooperate, okay? Spike had to think about it, then finally he nodded. Great, the doctor smiled. Then he asked Spike to reach out his arms. Tell me if this hurts, he said, and gently stretched out Spike's left arm to its near limit, then stretched it upwards and bent it a little. Spike didn't say anything, so the doctor moved on to Spike's right arm and stretched it out. Spike tried not to say anything until it hurt so badly he let out a small grunt. Did that hurt? The doctor asked. A little, Spike replied. The doctor stretched and bent the arm a little more, then asked Spike if his ribs were hurting. Spike nodded, amazed by how the doctor would know just by stretching his arm. The doctor sighed and wiped his glasses again, obviously a habit of his. Spike, it would be helpful to me if you could please just take your shirt off. Spike hesitated. I understand this is uncomfortable for you. I get a lot of patients who aren't too happy about having to undress in front of a complete stranger, but I'm only trying to help you out, okay? This was a big dilemma to Spike. He didn't want to undress and show his scars and bruises. He didn't want to risk the doctor starting to ask a lot of questions about them. Then again, the doctor was an adult and authority. Spike didn't want to start protesting or disobeying him. He thought about it for a long while, and then he sighed deep and agreed to take only his shirt off. He took it off slowly, making sure the doctor didn't see his back, but when he was about to reach up his arm and pull the shirt over his head, pain jolted through his ribs again. The doctor offered to help him take the shirt off, and even though it was unpleasant to Spike, he realized he needed help and let the doctor help him. He was very careful and didn't touch Spike's body at all when he took it off. Now I'm going to start touching your torso a little, okay? The doctor said. I'm only trying to check to see where it hurts. Spike looked down on himself. He noticed he was covered in various sized bruises, but he felt he was safe. The doctor knew he had been in a fight and would probably guess all the bruises were caused by that fight. Ow! Spike suddenly said as the doctor gently pushed on the right side of his rib cage. The doctor then started feeling each and every one of them until Spike again made a sound. Then he felt some more on that particular rib and came to a conclusion. Okay, I think I know what your problem is, the doctor said, and stood up without taking his eyes off of Spike's ribs. I'd prefer to have you x-rayed first, but it seems quite obvious that you've suffered a minor fracture on one of your ribs. He reached down and carefully touched the one he meant, saying, this one's fractured, and smiled compassionately to Spike. That's it, Spike said, hoping he could get his shirt back on. Not quite. I'll give you some medicines for the pain, and I must ask you to cough every now and then so you won't get water in your lungs, and then we'll just have to wait for it to heal. It's just a small fracture. It'll heal just as fine as you're careful. Now, do you hurt anywhere else? The doctor asked. Here and there, but it's nothing really, Spike said. No, tell me, the doctor said. Well, Spike began, my stomach kind of hurts. I got kicked in it pretty hard. Right, do you see that chair-like bed over there? I want you to lie down on it so I can check your abdomen. Can you do that? Okay, Spike said hesitantly and walked over to the bed the doctor had pointed out. Once he lay down, the doctor started feeling his stomach, touching and pressing around his organs gently. Then he put on an instrument he had around his neck and held it against Spike's belly. What's that? Spike asked. That's a stethoscope. It's usually used to listen to the patient's heart or lungs, but I wanted to try and hear if I could spot anything abnormal with your organs. Now breathe deeply for me, please. And exhale. Thank you. The doctor stood up and put the stethoscope around his neck again. Did you hear anything? Spike asked. I was trying to find out if you had any internal bleedings, but it seems and sounds just fine to me. You'll just have to take it easy for a few days. I bet you'll feel better by tomorrow already. He smiled. So that's it? I can go now? Well, first I want to ask you if you could tell me where you've been injured in that fight of yours. I'll see what I can remember, Spike said and thought back at the fight. I was kicked in the ribs, but you already checked that, and my stomach. I was punched some other places as well, but I think they only left bruises, which hurt a little when I move in certain ways, and then I was kicked in the, balls. Mind if I have a look at that? The doctor asked. You want to have a look down there? A kick in the groin can be a serious thing. I'd like to check if anything has been damaged in any way. Spike stuttered, didn't know what to reply. However, he knew there was no chance he was going to let the doctor examine him down there. Yeah, I don't want you to do that, Spike finally managed to say. Please don't do it, he begged. Okay, I won't, the doctor said. Spike exhaled, relieved. But then you have to promise me that if you notice anything unusual that you will contact me, okay? Okay, Spike promised. Then he stood up and got back up from the bench-like bed. Whoa, wait, the doctor said. What's that on your back? Fuck. Spike shouted on the inside. How could he have forgotten to hide his back? They're, stretch marks, he said naively, hoping he could fool the doctor. The doctor took off his glasses again and didn't wipe them this time. He sighed and told Spike to take his seat again. Spike did as he was told without asking any questions. Much unlike the doctor, who was now filled with questions. Spike, how did you get those scars? Some kind of accident when I was little. I can't remember it, though, Spike lied. The doctor looked incredulously at him, but let it pass. "What about those bruises?" he asked. "They're from the fight, I just told you." The doctor shook his head. "They're not all from the fight. Some of them are quite old, like the one on your upper arm shaped like somebody grabbed you really hard. The same with that bruise on your face. That one can't be more than a few days old." Spike looked away. "I would like to go now," he said low. The doctor crouched in front of Spike and tried looking at him in the eyes. "Look, Spike, if there's anything you want to tell me, I'll listen, okay? And I'm a doctor, so I won't tell anyone about anything you say. Whatever you decide to tell me will stay between me and you, okay?" Spike didn't answer, though a small part of him inside felt like just telling the doctor everything, but he was too afraid of the consequences and too ashamed of it all to dare utter a single word. Instead, he got his shirt back on and repeated, "I would like to go now, please." The doctor nodded, "Okay," and added a worried yet kind smile. "You may go, but you're welcome to come back any time you want. Just ask for Lucas and you'll get to talk to me again. Or if you want to talk to someone else, I have some good people I can recommend you. Okay, Spike?" Spike nodded, still looking away. "Right," the doctor smiled and looked up. He gave Spike some medicines and instructions on how to use them. "You just take it easy this week. Don't strain your body in any way." "Yeah," Spike said and politely thanked the doctor before he walked out the door. Sam looked worriedly at Spike when he came out of the doctor's office, immediately asking him what the doctor said. "I fractured a rib," Spike said casually. "Come on, let's get back to school."